Bob's Tuesday began like every other, fighting with his outdated laptop, muttering curses under his breath, and dealing with Karen from HR, who couldn't figure out how to reset her password for the 5th time this week. He wasn't expecting his day to spiral into chaos, but fate had a wicked sense of humor. The window in his small apartment shattered, showering his half-eaten ramen in a flurry of glass and drywall dust. Before he could process the mess, a strikingly beautiful woman, no, alien, collapsed onto his couch. She had silver skin that shimmered like moonlight, long hair that flowed like liquid starlight, and a high-tech outfit that looked less like clothing and more like a suggestion. "Protect me!" she gasped, her voice dripping with desperation, and a sultriness that made Bob's brain short-circuit. "What the hell?" Bob yelped, grabbing the nearest thing he could find, a spatula. "Please!" she panted, crawling toward him with feline grace. Her every movement seemed choreographed to distract. "They're coming for me. You must help." Bob blinked. "Who's coming? And why are you dressed like that?" He gestured vaguely at her outfit, or lack thereof. There was no time for answers. His front door burst open, and men in tactical gear poured in, shouting orders about containment protocols and lethal force. Bob panicked, holding up his spatula like it was a weapon. "Target identified," one agent barked, aiming a rifle. "Oh, hell no!" Bob shrieked, dropping the spatula and diving behind the couch. The alien woman, unbothered by the chaos, rose to her feet, a sultry smirk playing on her lips. "Pathetic Earth weapons," she purred, and with a flick of her wrist, a compact device materialized in her hand. A flash of light erupted, and the agents froze in place, weapons clattering to the floor. Bob peeked over the couch, his mouth hanging open. "Did you just stun the SWAT team?" "FBI, technically," she corrected, brushing imaginary dust off her shoulder. "And yes. Who are you?" She turned to him, her silver eyes locking onto his. "Sizithra. The galaxy's most wanted." Bob's stomach sank. "And you're in my apartment because you're the only one who can help me." Bob laughed nervously. "Lady, I'm an IT guy. The most danger I've faced today is reheated ramen." Sizithra didn't seem to care. She slinked closer, her voice lowering to a husky whisper. "I can make it worth your while." Her gaze flicked up and down, lingering just long enough to make Bob's face flush crimson. Define worth my while," he stammered, taking a step back. She grinned, clearly enjoying his discomfort. "We'll discuss terms after you get me out of here." Before Bob could respond, the frozen agents started twitching. Sizithra grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. "No time to argue. Move!" "Wait. My laptop." Sizithra didn't let him finish. Dragging him down the hall, she muttered something about primitive technology and wasting time. Bob stumbled after her, heart pounding as sirens blared outside. In the parking lot, a black SUV screeched to a halt, more agents spilling out. Bob froze, muttering, "I'm so dead," as Sizithra pushed him behind a dumpster. "Stay here," she ordered, stepping into the open. Bob peeked around the corner, expecting her to surrender. Instead, she strutted toward the agents, her hips swaying like she was on a runway. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice dripping with charm, "surely we can talk about this." The agents hesitated, their weapons lowering slightly. Bob couldn't tell if it was her pheromones, her outfit, or sheer confidence, but they looked hypnotized. "She's disarming them," Bob whispered to himself, impressed despite his terror. Then Sizithra winked at him and pulled another gadget from her barely there outfit. A blinding flash erupted, followed by shouts of confusion. She darted back to Bob, grabbing his hand. "Time to go, Earthling." Bob barely had time to process before they were sprinting down the street, dodging cars and bewildered pedestrians. "This is insane," he wheezed. "I'm not cut out for this." "You'll adapt," Sizithra replied breezily, not even out of breath. Bob shot her a look. "I reset passwords for a living. Adaptation is not in my skill set." Sizithra laughed, a musical sound that somehow made the situation more surreal. Then consider this your crash course in survival. They ducked into an alley, Bob collapsing against a wall. Okay, you owe me answers, he panted. Who are you running from? And why do you think I can help? Sizithra crouched beside him, her expression softening. The galaxy is vast, Bob, and full of enemies who want what I've taken. What did you take? She hesitated, then smirked. Something valuable enough to make me the most wanted woman alive. Bob groaned. Great. So now I'm harboring a galactic fugitive. Just what I needed. You'll thank me later, she teased, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Bob froze, his pulse quickening. He was pretty sure she was messing with him, but her proximity, and the way she looked at him, made it hard to think. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He muttered. Sizithra leaned closer, her lips curving into a mischievous smile. More than you know. Before Bob could respond, a distant explosion jolted them back to reality. They're getting closer, Sizithra said, standing. We need to keep moving. Bob sighed, hauling himself to his feet. This is the worst Tuesday of my life. Sizithra grinned. For me, it's a vacation. Bob rolled his eyes and followed her, muttering under his breath. I'm so going to need therapy after this. Bob's life had never been more complicated. The morning had started like any other, slightly hungover, his computer breaking down at the worst possible moment, and now, he was on the run with a stunning alien criminal. How the hell had he gotten to this point? Sizithra was everything Bob was not, smooth, composed, dangerous in a way that made him question every choice he'd ever made in his life. She didn't seem rattled by their predicament at all. If anything, she was thriving in the chaos, constantly glancing over her shoulder with a sly grin, like it was all just a game to her. Bob, on the other hand, was sweating bullets. Every time they rounded a corner, it felt like the entire city was closing in on them. Where are we even going? He asked, still trying to catch his breath. Somewhere safe, she replied, her tone nonchalant, like she had all the time in the galaxy. I have a contact here on Earth. Right, Bob muttered. That makes total sense. An alien has a contact on Earth. He was starting to wonder if he was the one being hustled. We all have our connections, Bob, Sizithra said with a wink. Even someone as charming as me. Bob didn't know if he should feel flattered or insulted by that. Considering she had been using her charm to get them out of every sticky situation, he was leaning toward insulted. As they ducked into a narrow alley, Bob noticed the subtle way she moved, her eyes constantly scanning for danger, but her movements were always fluid, almost seductive. It was as if the universe itself had designed her to be trouble. And now he was in the middle of it. Okay, enough with the evasive answers, Bob said, rubbing his temples. Who's after you? What did you do? Sizithra stopped walking and turned to face him, her gaze intense. Let's just say I took something precious, and now the galaxy wants me to pay. Bob stared at her, unimpressed. You took something? Really? You're a thief? She laughed. I prefer the term acquirer of valuable goods. Bob wasn't buying it. So you steal things for a living, and now I'm stuck helping you? Not just any things, Bob. Valuable things. Things that make powerful people very, very angry. Bob sighed. Why do I have the feeling you're not giving me the whole story? Sizithra's lips curled into a playful smile. Because you're smart, Bob. You should have stuck to IT. I don't even know how I got dragged into this. Bob shot back. All I did was save your ass from the FBI. You're lucky I didn't hit you with a chair or something. Sizithra raised an eyebrow. If you had, you'd be dead by now. Those were not FBI agents. They were bounty hunters. Bob's stomach dropped. Great. Bounty hunters. You've got bounty hunters after you now? Sizithra's eyes glinted with amusement. Not just any bounty hunters, Bob. The best. Super. Bob was starting to feel like his entire life had turned into a bad action movie. So, what's your plan? You're just going to run around the city while these guys hunt us down? Not just run, Bob. Sisyphus purred, her eyes flickering with something that might have been admiration. We'll outsmart them. Outsmart them? How? With your charm? Bob couldn't help but roll his eyes. Charm's only good for so long, Sisyphus replied, a flicker of darkness crossing her face. But when charm fails, there's always another way. She turned to him, her voice lowering to a teasing whisper. And I think you're starting to figure it out. Bob didn't like the look in her eyes. What's that supposed to mean? She smirked. You're more resourceful than you give yourself credit for, Bob. And you don't even realize it. Bob just stared at her. I've been an IT guy for 10 years. The only resourceful thing I've done is fix printers and upgrade people's operating systems. Sisyphus' laughter was like music, smooth and melodic. That's exactly the kind of resourcefulness we need right now. Bob's confusion only deepened. What the hell are you talking about? You'll see. They kept moving through the city, dodging more bounty hunters at every turn. Bob couldn't help but notice the way Sisyphus had a plan for every encounter. She was calm, collected, like she had done this 1,000 times before. Meanwhile, Bob was starting to feel like he'd been thrown into the deep end without a life vest. Okay, you've got to explain this whole resourcefulness thing, Bob finally demanded, his frustration starting to show. Sisyphus turned to him with a wicked grin. Well, Bob, when you're being hunted by the galaxy's best, you don't rely on brute force. You outsmart them. You improvise. Improvise? Bob repeated. Like how? She paused, considering him for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. All right, Bob. We're going to hack into their systems. Your IT skills are going to come in handy after all. Bob blinked. Wait, my skills? You want me to hack bounty hunters? Sisyphus' smile was wicked. Precisely. Bob shook his head. I'm pretty sure this is illegal. Who cares? She teased, poking him in the ribs. You're helping me, and you're getting paid handsomely. Bob snorted. I'm pretty sure helping you is a felony, but sure, I'm in. I'm already knee-deep in this mess. As they approached an abandoned building, Sisyphus gave him a pointed look. Get ready, Bob. You're about to become the most important human on this planet. Bob gulped. I'm really going to need a raise after this. Sisyphus' eyes sparkled with amusement. You'll get more than a raise, Bob. You'll get the whole galaxy. Bob wasn't sure if he should be excited or terrified. Either way, his life was never going to be the same again. Bob was starting to feel like he had truly entered another dimension. 1 minute, he was fixing computers for a living, and the next, he was the unwilling partner of a galactic thief who had turned his life into a high-speed chase with bounty hunters hot on their trail. This was nothing like the mundane IT problems he'd been used to. This was a whole new level of chaos. So, how exactly am I supposed to hack these guys? Bob asked, running his fingers through his hair in frustration. He had no idea how they'd gotten to this point, let alone how to handle the situation. Sisyphus looked at him with a knowing smile, as if he'd asked the most obvious question in the universe. Simple. You just need to hack into their communications system, Bob. It's not like you haven't done it before, right? Bob narrowed his eyes. I've never hacked into anything illegal before. Well, she purred, her voice dripping with mischief. Today's a first. Welcome to the exciting world of intergalactic crime. Bob threw his hands up. I'm not sure this is the kind of excitement I signed up for. You didn't sign up for any of this, Bob, Sisyphus said, her voice softening as she gave him a quick, assessing glance. But here we are. So you better get used to it. Bob sighed. I don't even know where to start. She grinned, her eyes narrowing. You start by trusting me. You've been doing it all day. Trusting you? Bob snorted. I've been dragged across the city, chased by bounty hunters, and forced to help you hack into a highly illegal system. What part of that says trustworthy? She leaned closer, her lips brushing against his ear as she whispered. The part where I'm saving your ass. Bob's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the first time he noticed how close she'd gotten, but he was suddenly acutely aware of her proximity. He wasn't sure if it was her charm or just the sheer absurdity of the situation that was making him second-guess his thoughts. Either way, it didn't make his life any less complicated. "All right, I'm in," he muttered, clearly frustrated with himself. "But if we get caught, I'm blaming you." Sisytha winked. "Fair enough." Bob set to work, his fingers moving over the keyboard, trying to piece together the system they were working with. It was strange. On the one hand, he felt the adrenaline rush of the situation, but on the other, his mind was still telling him this wasn't real. This couldn't be his life. As he navigated through the system, Bob could feel Sisytha watching him, occasionally giving him instructions or teasing him with playful comments. It should have been irritating, but something about her made him want to impress her, something that had nothing to do with saving the world or fighting off bounty hunters. "You're good at this," she said, her tone surprisingly sincere. Bob barely looked up from the screen. "You're the first person who's ever said that." She tilted her head, eyes full of amusement. "That's because you've been wasting your talents on something as boring as Ike." "Well, it pays the bills," Bob muttered, half joking, half serious. Sisytha grinned. "Yeah, well, now you've got a chance to really make a name for yourself. Hack into their system, Bob. You've got this." Bob took a deep breath, narrowing his focus on the task at hand. The bounty hunter system wasn't that different from what he worked with back home. Just a lot more complex and, illegal. But what was a little law-breaking when your life was at risk? "All right," he said, typing furiously. "I'm in. But I'm going to need a distraction." Sisytha raised an eyebrow. "A distraction?" Bob nodded. "Yeah. I can't do this alone. I need you to keep their attention while I finish this up." She smiled, her eyes gleaming with amusement. "Oh, don't worry. I'm very good at keeping people's attention." Before Bob could respond, she was already slipping out of the room, her movements graceful and confident. Bob couldn't help but shake his head. She was a force of nature, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. He focused back on the screen, his fingers flying over the keyboard. For a moment, it was just him and the system, no bounty hunters, no Sisytha, just him and the job. He was in his element now, and the tension in his shoulders eased as he typed out the last few commands. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the other side of the door. Bob's heart skipped. "Sisytha?" he called, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I've got this, Bob," came her muffled reply. He gritted his teeth. There was no way he could let her do all the work. The clock was ticking. "Almost done," Bob muttered to himself. Outside, he could hear the chaos starting to escalate, footsteps pounding, voices shouting in the hall. Bob didn't even flinch. This was his moment. He hit the final key, and the bounty hunter's communications system locked down. The door flew open, and Sisytha rushed in, breathless but triumphant. "Done?" she asked. Bob flashed her a grin. "Done." Sisytha let out a low whistle. "Impressive." "You're welcome," Bob replied, feeling a rush of pride. She raised an eyebrow, then gave him a teasing smile. "Not bad for an IT guy." Bob couldn't help but laugh. "Yeah, well, you're lucky I'm that good." Sisytha stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "Lucky, huh?" Bob froze. He wasn't sure what was happening. Was she flirting with him again? It felt like it, but he wasn't sure if that was just part of her game. Before he could ask, the sound of approaching footsteps broke through the tension. "Time to go," she said quickly, pulling him towards the exit. Bob didn't argue. He'd done his part. Now it was time to get the hell out of here. As they slipped into the shadows of the alley, Bob had no idea what would come next. But one thing was for sure, he was in way deeper than he ever expected, and the ride was far from over. Bob sat on the edge of a rickety chair, his fingers tapping nervously against the side. They'd been on the run for hours, jumping from one hiding spot to the next, and now they were holed up in some abandoned building with no clear plan for escape. The only thing keeping him from losing his mind was the constant, distracting presence of Sizithra. "Do you ever stop talking?" Bob muttered, rubbing his temples in frustration. Sizithra shot him a sly grin from across the room. "Do you ever stop whining?" Bob scowled at her, but his irritation was fading, replaced by a creeping sense of disbelief. How the hell had his life become this ridiculous? He was sitting in a rundown building, hiding from intergalactic bounty hunters, while a criminal mastermind from another planet kept throwing sly remarks at him. And yet, despite it all, something about the situation felt exhilarating. He glanced at her. She was leaning casually against the wall, her eyes narrowed, scanning the room as if she had no care in the world. And yet, every time she spoke, her words seemed to carry weight, a playful danger that kept him on edge. "I'm just saying, this whole thing is completely insane," Bob said, trying to make sense of it all. "I fix computers for a living. That's it. And now I'm helping you hack into systems while evading a whole fleet of alien bounty hunters. How does that ever happen?" Sizithra smiled knowingly. "It happens because the universe has a strange sense of humor, Bob. 1 minute, you're sitting in front of a computer screen, pressing a few keys, and the next, you're a criminal mastermind's right-hand man." Bob raised an eyebrow. "I'm not exactly your right-hand man." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a low, teasing whisper. "Maybe not yet. But you're learning fast. You have potential, Bob." His heart skipped a beat, but he quickly brushed it off. She was playing him, of course, she always did. Still, he couldn't ignore the thrill that ran through him every time she looked at him like that. "So, what's the plan now?" he asked, trying to distract himself from whatever strange attraction was building between them. "The plan is simple," she said, walking over to the desk, pulling up a holographic map of the city. "We need to get to the extraction point before the bounty hunters find us. The longer we stay here, the closer they get." "Extraction point?" Bob repeated. "Like what, are we calling in a getaway ship or something?" "Exactly," Sizithra said, her eyes lighting up as she tapped a few buttons on the hologram. "You'll be our pilot." Bob blinked. "What? I'm not a pilot. I'm an IT guy." Sizithra gave him a pointed look. "You're an IT guy who just managed to hack into a highly advanced galactic communications system. If you can do that, you can handle a flight. I have faith in you." Bob groaned. "You have a weird way of showing faith." "Well, I wouldn't have picked you if I didn't think you were useful, now would I?" Sizithra retorted. "Besides, I've seen how you work under pressure. You're surprisingly good at thinking on your feet." Bob sat back, crossing his arms over his chest. "I still don't see how I'm supposed to pilot an alien ship with no training." "You're asking a lot here." She raised an eyebrow. "You think I haven't been in worse situations?" "You're a quick learner, Bob. You'll figure it out." "Yeah, well, you always make it look easy," Bob muttered, clearly frustrated. "You're a criminal mastermind. You've been doing this kind of thing your whole life. I'm just me. A guy who fixes computers." She laughed softly, her laughter almost too smooth, too alluring. Bob. Don't sell yourself short. You've been more helpful than you think. Besides, I like you just the way you are." There it was again, the casual flirtation, the undeniable pull. Bob could feel it, but he wasn't sure if he should act on it. It wasn't like he could just forget the fact that she was a galactic fugitive, or that she'd used him more than once. But the problem was, every time she looked at him with those eyes, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could let all that slide. "So, what's next?" Bob asked, finally giving in to the weird dynamic between them. Sizithra moved towards him, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. "Next? You're going to drive, and I'm going to keep us alive long enough to get us out of here." Bob swallowed hard. "Right. Great. Don't worry," she said, her voice suddenly serious. "I know what I'm doing. I've gotten out of worse scrapes than this. You just need to keep it together, and we'll be fine." Bob gave a nervous laugh. "Great, so no pressure then?" Sizithra smirked. "None at all. There was a long pause as Bob tried to process everything: his new, absurd role in the galactic underworld, the fact that he was now an unwitting accomplice to a highly wanted fugitive, and the tension that had been building between them for the last few hours. Finally, he stood up and shook his head, trying to shake off the strange feeling in his chest. "All right, let's do this. Where's the ship?" Sizithra grinned, her eyes glinting. "Follow me." As they moved toward the exit, Bob couldn't help but think that somehow, against all odds, he was starting to enjoy the chaos.